Why would I make a video about Gen X? Well, so there's a lot of comments that were saying that they weren't sure, people weren't sure if I was a millennial, they weren't sure if I was a Gen Yer, they weren't sure if I was a baby Gen Xer. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about why I love Gen X so much, and talk about some of the things I loved. I want to talk about what was the one big major lesson, or what was the one takeaway that I got from Gen X, and maybe talk a little bit about, what us millennials can do to help out Gen Z and help support the next generation on the way up. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. I'm going to start with a Gen X story, and I think when I think about what generation do I belong to, I do believe I'm an in-betweener. I'm in between Gen X and I am in between being a millennial. And one of the persons in the comments said, well, there's something called a Zennial. So I probably fit most into that category, if I had to put a category on it. That being said, I had a lot of Gen X experiences growing up. And, I want to talk about some of those experiences. And you tell me, if you're from Generation X, tell me, did you have a similar experience? So, for a lot of people that grew up in what I call Gen X, in the 90s, in the 80s and the 90s, in particular for me in the 90s, we knew the world before instant everything. You know what I mean? We couldn't get instant music, we couldn't get instant TV, instant YouTube, none of that existed. So whenever we wanted to do something, we had to go out and do it. I remember, and we were doing this from a young age. So one of my big memories, and people that grew up, that if you're Gen Z, you probably have no idea what this is, but I even know the world before Blockbuster. What does that mean? Well, back in the day, we used to have local video stores that would rent VHS tapes. And where I'm from, which is Regina, Saskatchewan, I had a local place called Video Plus. And what would happen is my dad, now this is the Gen X story of all Gen X stories, my dad would give me like $10, and he would say, all right, Matt, go rent the video, go pick me up a pack of smokes and get yourself a Slurpee. So I would literally, and he would give me a note. I would take the note with me. I would go to the corner store, and the corner store guy's name was Andy. I even remember his name because I was at the corner store a lot. And I would give him the note, and I said, Mom, my dad wants that. And you have to understand, I was doing this at like 6 years old, 7 years old, kindergarten, grade 1. I was out and I was roaming, and I was out buying my dad cigarettes from the local convenience store at a very early age. So I would go, I'd hand him the note, I'd hand him the $10, and Andy would sell me the cigarettes. And then in that same strip mall, there was a Video Plus. So then I would take the rest of that money and I'd go rent a movie from Video Plus or a VHS. So I'd go into the Video Plus store, and you have to understand, this is not a Blockbuster. This is, there's one copy of each movie if you're lucky to have the movie if it's there. So if you wanted to get a new release, you just had to get lucky to get there, and hopefully the new release was in. But if it wasn't in, you would literally have to scour all the movies they had in the place and find a different movie. And by doing this, and here's the thing, you didn't have streaming. So you had it might have cost like $2 or $3 to rent the video. So you would have to scour, and you'd be looking through all these different titles. I remember I was looking through Leprechaun 1 or like Scarecrow, and just these random titles, and you'd have to find a title that you wanted to watch. And by doing that, you ended up watching lots of different genres of film. And so I would go to the Video Plus and I would scour this place for a movie to watch. And you would, every once in a while, you'd find just beautiful, like just gems of movies, things that you never ever thought you could find and enjoy. If it wasn't for this way of doing things, I never would have got and fell in love with the Leprechaun series. I never would have found Bruce Lee, and I never would have found Enter the Dragon, and I wouldn't have found all these great types of movies. The Gate, I remember I loved The Gate. And just, and it was such an experience because it's very hands-on. Everything in Gen X was so hands-on, you know what I mean? Like, you had to go out and do it, and you had to go out and find it. There was no device, and there was no IMDb. There was no checking to see what are the critics saying, unless you're watching like Siskel and Ebert. Anyways, I'd grab the movie, and then I'd head over to 7-Eleven, I'd grab a Slurpee, and this is all for $10, and I'd probably have change left over, and I would head home, drop my dad his cigarettes, and then take the movie, and me and my friends would go watch the movie and drink our Slurpees. I mean, this was Gen X in a nutshell, you know what I mean? And the other thing I loved about being in Generation X the other thing I loved about Gen X, when I look at Gen X, and I saw one of the comments too on my previous video mentioning that I was like the little brother of Gen X, which is so true, because I looked up to my older brother and his whole group of friends. Just gotta get out of the way here. I looked up to my older brother and his whole group of friends, my older brother, he's born in 79, and his friends were between probably 75 and 79. And we knew all the kids in the neighborhood, so we knew some of the older kids too, the older Gen Xers, and that's who we looked up to. I looked up to Gen X. Those were my heroes. All the people I looked up to as far as celebrities were concerned, as far as musicians were concerned, as far as movies that were being made were concerned, I was looking up to Gen X. And that the great thing about Gen X was just the originality, So when I think back on who were the big Gen X stars that we looked up to, and what was like, who are the Gen X people that we really loved? And I start to think back on who were my first heroes, and who are the people that I thought were cool, And it's pretty easy to start when you start with like the music scene, let's say. When you think about Gen X, you're thinking about Nirvana, you're thinking about Soundgarden, you're thinking about Pearl Jam, you're thinking about Alice in Chains, you're thinking about, depending on where your age group is at, and you're thinking about, and some people, if you're a little older, you'd be thinking about Mudhoney and stuff like that. And you think about that music. And really the music I'm going to be completely honest here. Now this is why I'm probably more of a, hey boss, how you doing? Getting busy over here. And then you look up to you start thinking about those musicians, and you think about even as I'm starting to get into the 90s and I'm watching wrestling, because I was a big wrestling fan back in the day, you start thinking about guys like The Rock. And The Rock was a Gen X guy. And you start looking at like Shawn Michaels, and you start looking at all these different types of wrestlers, Stone Cold. Even though Stone Cold's a little older, he had that Gen X attitude, And that Gen X attitude, which I really loved, was really about being yourself, expressing yourself. And even if you were sad and depressed and lonely and hopeless, you still went out there and you did it though. You still went out there and you still did your thing. And I think about, like the movie directors that I really loved. Well, the movie director for me, the quintessential Gen X movie director, was Quentin Tarantino. And you think about how influential Pulp Fiction was. You think about how influential Reservoir Dogs was just on me. I remember when I was a kid, I don't even know how old I would have been watching Reservoir Dogs. Maybe 16. And I remember we were watching that, and there's swear words, and it was a lot of dialogue, and it was so filmed so cool. I remember me and my buddy Matt Hoffman were watching it, and our minds were completely blown. They couldn't believe how great this movie was. I might have been younger than that. I can't remember. I might have been 14. I'd have to double check the timeline. And then obviously later on, you start watching films like Pulp Fiction. And you just see people are recreating the genre, you know what I mean? They're recreating music, they're recreating cinema and film, and they're recreating and doing their own thing. And I think that's part of what I really liked about Gen X, was that if you were a musician, or if you were a filmmaker, or if you were an athlete, you were doing it your way, you know what I mean? You had your inspirations, but you were doing it your way. And if you think about it too, the Fab Five, the basketball team, Michigan State, the Michigan Wolverines. And you think about them and how they really set themselves apart from everybody else and showed everybody kind of what cool was. And that's what I think about. When I think about Gen X, I think about just cool. I remember the kids I used to grow up with, how cool they were, like hanging out, listening to their music, skateboarding. A lot of them were in bands and kind of trying to find themselves throughout in their generation. And I really loved the fact that, they all smoked, and they like to drink beers, and they like to hang out, When I think about the most kind of quintessential, like Gen X movie to me, I think about Reality Bites, for example. Reality Bites really kind of, for me, put it in a nutshell. It was like Winona Ryder. It was like all these new up-and-coming stars, even though some of them were established. Winona Ryder was established. Ethan Hawke was established. Although Ethan Hawke, when you think about an earlier movie that I really love from that Gen X generation, The Dead Poets Society, and you think about that movie and how influential that was on not only me, a millennial, but also on the Gen X generation. But you saw all these Gen Xers, they were actually participating and creating their society, creating their culture. Obviously with the help from lots of other people, but they were the faces. You think about, Ethan Hawke played the character Troy in the movie Reality Bites. And he was like they call it the slacker generation, but he was like a intellectual slacker who didn't want to work and believed in art over commerce, which is really kind of there's a big theme floating throughout Generation X, which was, what the fine line between being yourself and selling out. There was a lot of talk of that and people discussing that. And it was always a part of our conversation that we would have. Oh, that guy's a sellout. Oh, Nirvana sold out because they went on a major label, or Green Day sold out, or whoever sold out. Rancid didn't sell out, And you just keep on going through, and these were different kinds of conversations you would have. And for me, I think about one of the most quintessential moments to me when I was kind of growing up in this time frame, looking up to Gen X, was I was at my buddy's place. This is loud over here. I was at my buddy's place. So back in the 90s, first and foremost, you had to kind of know where everybody was going to be. So if you're in the neighborhood, You had to know the places that your friends would hang out, so you would drive your bike there, or you'd have like a friend of yours whose house was kind of like the neighborhood hub, where you go hang out at this place, and your friends would all congregate there, and the parents were really cool. The boomer parents were kind of, they just came under the thumb of their parents, who were probably a lot stricter. But I remember I went to my buddy, his name's Andrew Sisson. I haven't spoken to him in a long time. But his house was like the hub of the neighborhood for me and my friends. And he had an older sister that was 1 year older than me. So Andrew and his friends would hang out at the house, and his older sister and her friends would hang out at the house. And for us, like a year was a big deal back in the day. But we loved hanging out with like a girl that was a year older. We thought, whoa, and they were like pretty, and it was incredible. And we're hanging out at his house. We're in the upstairs living room. And they have the big TV in the upstairs living room. We're not talking about, when I say big TV, I'm not talking about a 70-inch plasma. I'm talking about a big brown box TV, like the heaviest, like it looked like a piece of furniture, like an antique piece of furniture. It was like the craziest thing ever. My phone's ringing. And anyways, we're watching the TV, and we're watching MTV, because back in those days, like when I was growing up, I never had cable. All I had was 3 channels. So I never even got MTV or Much Music or anything like that. So when I was at my friends' places and they had cable, it was like a treat, So we're hanging out there, and we were enjoying, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, MTV's on, or Much Music's on, I guess, one of the two. And what starts playing but Nirvana, Unplugged, live and Unplugged in New York. Like that whole concert started playing. So we all sat there, me, my friend, my buddy Andrew, his sister and her friends, and our other friends were there. And we were watching this concert. And just the total feel of it, and just Kurt and band and how they all were, like just the whole vibe of it, how it looked, the Stargazer lilies, the kind of periwinkle, and the feel of it was pretty incredible. And I remember we were all kind of blown away by how good it was, how strong the musicianship was, how good I didn't know a lot of these songs. Like I never heard of any of these Meat Puppet songs or anything like that. I remember there being rumors at some point, Nirvana's gonna have big guests at their concert in New York. And people are speculating, is it gonna be David Bowie? Is it gonna be Eddie Vedder? And all of a sudden it was like, just like the Meat Puppets. And you're like, who the hell are the Meat Puppets? And all of a sudden they start playing the Meat Puppet songs, Where the bad folks go when they die, don't go to heaven where the angels fly. Go to a lake of fire and fry, see them again on the 4th of July. And you're just like, like crazy. Or like Plateau or whatever the songs were. Nothing on the top but a bucket and a mop, and illustrated book about birds. Incredible songs. And I remember being blown away by this. And completely blown away by this. And the thing about that concert, for me, because even that concert was generational, meaning it wasn't just Gen X that liked it. Gen X liked it, but so did the millennial generation, but so did the boomer generation. Like my dad loved that concert, loved that live and Unplugged in New York. I loved all those songs. So it spanned generations. And that's how you know a musician or an artist is just bigger than their time. And I remember when I was watching Kurt sing and I was listening to his voice, watching him play and watching him interact with the crowd, I was thinking to myself, and I was telling you that I was gonna tell you what's the number one lesson that I took away from Generation X or from Gen X. What's the most important thing that I learned? And that concert is what taught me what it was. Of course, the wind's coming up, you gotta love it. But the most important thing I learned from that, watching that concert, and what I felt and what I saw in Kurt Cobain was authenticity. He was totally authentic. His voice was authentic. His style was authentic. His feel was authentic. Everything about that band, man, especially Kurt, was authentic. And then I started thinking about Gen X in general, and I started thinking about Quentin Tarantino and his movies, authentic. I started thinking about all those bands I loved. Soundgarden did not sound like Nirvana. Pearl Jam did not sound like Nirvana. Alice in Chains did not sound like, they all were their own thing. They're all playing music, but they're doing it their way. They're making films, but they're doing it their way. They're skateboarding, but they're doing it their way. And the whole point for me, and the biggest lesson for me, and I might have forgotten it for a while, was the importance of being authentic. And if you watch my videos, you see me talking a lot about being authentic and the importance of it. And for me, if Gen X was nothing else, it was authentic. And you start thinking about just, when I think about even the older Gen Xers that I, found myself hanging out with every once in a while, they were always so hilarious. I mean, there was no real censorship, like people were gonna say whatever they're gonna say, and they were, they're funny, man. The older Gen X guys cracked me up, man. They would say whatever, and they're funny, uncensored, and they're unapologetically themselves. So when I look back on Gen X, and I look back on all the people I looked up to from that generation, they weren't copying each other. They were doing their own thing. They were doing it their way. And I think that when I think about Gen X, for me, it's the last great generation, or the last generation. Because in my opinion, the job or role of the previous generation is to inspire the next generation. So, and I think about myself, and I think about, it's a little loud over here. And I think about being a millennial, or being a Gen Y-er, or being a recovering Gen Xer, whatever you want to call me. I feel like maybe the millennial generation, we could have done, or the Gen Y, we could have done a better job to inspire Gen Z. Maybe we could have done something different. So I feel like Gen X, honestly, every time I went, whether I'd be working in the bank or whatever I was doing, or I was hanging out, or I was, whatever I was doing. But I always felt like the Gen X generation would always put their arm around me and kind of mentor me. I always felt like, every time I went into like a work situation, the older generation honestly would take me under their wing, show me the ropes, teach me what to do, teach me what not to do, show me how to be cool, tell me show me what the great music was, tell me why it was great, tell me about the great movies, and tell me what was cool to do, And Gen X did that for me. For me, though, I don't think I did that with Gen Z as much as I should have. So I feel like, as a millennial or as a Gen Yer, that I need to start reaching out to Gen Z a bit more and trying to build that bridge between Gen Z and Gen Y, or between Gen Z and the millennial world. But I don't know, comment below, let me know what your thoughts are on that. And Gen Z, I guess what I want to say to you, if you're listening, when I look at the comments and I look at the people that are watching my videos, it's from the age ranges of 25 to like 55. So I think I kind of have like Gen Z, millennial, and I got some Gen Xers in there. If you look at the comments, I'm getting comments from millennials, elder millennials, younger millennials, Gen Zers, and Gen Xers. And I think there might have been some older people that have also comment, or older than that. But Gen Z, I just wanted to say, if you're out there, if you're listening, my name is Matt Ross. I'm a millennial, elder millennial, recovering Gen Xer. If you see a millennial out there, and when I think about it, there are Gen Zers, a lot of Gen Zers are actually kind of, I'm trying to think of, I'm not sure exactly what year Gen Z starts. Is it 2000? Because I don't really have a lot of 25-year-old friends. But anyways, I'm Matt Ross. I'm a millennial. And just wanted to say hello. And I wanted to say, and this is the one thing too that I think that I don't really quite understand about Gen Z, because I never experienced it myself. Thank goodness, thank God, thank the universe, thank whoever you want to thank. But I never grew up with social media. I never grew up with Facebook. I never grew up with WhatsApp. I never grew up with any of that. I graduated in like 99. And I never got my first cell phone till like 2003, 2004. I never got on Facebook till like 2006, 2007. This generation had to grow up with not being able to get away from the outside world, So at least when there's things going wrong or whatever in school, or so maybe you're getting bullied when you're a Gen Xer or a Gen Yer or a millennial, you could just go home and kind of, that was your haven. You could go home and you could hide out and you could just do your thing. And nobody could get to you because people weren't really calling you on the phone like that. You couldn't get instant messages. People couldn't hit you on Facebook or Instagram or anything. There was no way to get to you. So this generation, man, they basically have to live, had no escape from whatever was going on outside. And you have to deal with the constant interference of social media. And I just think that is a difficult, that would have been very difficult for me to have navigated in the 90s. I'm just glad I never had to deal with it. Even to this day, I used to have Facebook a long time ago, but I just canceled it because I don't like it. I find it that it's just, I ended up, I kind of refer it to Facebook because there was nothing really authentic about it. So I just think that it would be a lot more difficult to just be yourself in a world of social media. So I just wanted to say to Gen Z, you guys had it tough and have it tough. And as a elder millennial, I want to say that I kind of get that now. I didn't get it before. And if I was a bit of a dick or something, or a jerk, because I know that maybe there's a feeling out there that Gen Z is lazy or Gen Z doesn't know what they're doing. And I just think that we as a generation, myself, I just need to have a little bit more compassion, because when I look back on what you had to deal with, it's tough. That would not be an easy scene to navigate. And I sure as hell wouldn't have wanted that growing up in where I'm from and going to university or going to high school or whatever the case may be. I'm so glad I didn't have to deal with that aspect of things. So I do have some empathy for Gen Z. And I was, like I said, I was lucky because Gen X actually took an active role in mentoring me. And I want to say thank you to all the Gen Xers out there for inspiring me to want to play music, for inspiring me to want to paint and to inspire me to be myself. Even though I might have lost myself a little bit along the way. But I just want to say to Gen X, thank you, man. Thank you for reminding me and for teaching me that the single most important thing you can be in your life is authentic. To be authentically yourself. And that's what I'm dedicating the rest of my life to, is that authenticity and helping the next generation find themselves and mentor them when I can, if they want to be. And I look forward to it. So that's funny thing was I was gonna do this video inside in my apartment, condo, whatever. But I was like, I can't do a love letter to Gen X inside, because Gen X spent their whole damn life outside, especially in the 90s, you know? So I was like, get out. And I wanted to come do it in Queen West, Toronto, because I feel like Queen West, especially when I was here when I was in my younger days, Queen West is so Gen X, you know what I mean? I met so many great Gen Xers here while I was here. And I just felt the appropriate place to do the video in Toronto, if I'm gonna do a love letter to Gen X, is in Queen West. So when I was walking through the back alleys there, one of those places was where I used to live, and I used to just roam the back alleys. So I thought it was the right way to do it. Anyways, so this is my love letter to Gen X. Tell me what I missed. I'm sure I missed a lot of things, but I just wanted to say thank you, Gen X, for always inspiring me and for being there for me and mentoring me when I was younger and I was a kid. And I'm going to embrace the fact that I'm a millennial, even though if you look at the comments, there's some discrepancies on where that kind of timeline falls. But hey, it is what it is. I'm Matt Ross. I'm the Lone Wolf.